This is All India Radio, Power of Listening. Under this series, tonight we take you on a journey to the world of yet another magnificent facet of the traditional Indian knowledge systems. I'm Manoj Mindkar. In this episode, we shall be focusing on something very interesting: zero, the pivot which mathematics rotates upon. Zero, the magical invention of India that underpins practically everything that we do. In today's episode, let's walk through a gallery that is all about the glory of India, that is, all about the genesis of zero. This is about the magnificent Zero Gallery in Kolkata. The experts on this episode of the show are Professor P. Mukhopadhyay and Bijadi Chakraborty. In conversation with them is Dr. Manas Pratim Das. So, let's move on the theme Zero Gallery, Kolkata. Stay tuned.
Welcome, listeners, to another edition of Power of Listening. Today, we are at the Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur, where we have just witnessed a wonderful display of some concepts regarding the evolution of zero. Not only the evolution, the genesis as well. Now, the person who is responsible for the setting up of this gallery called the Zero Gallery, Associate Professor Parthasarathi Mukhopadhyay of the Department of Mathematics is with us. Along with him, we have Assistant Professor Bijadi Chakraborty, who has played a key role in making this gallery very communicative, easily understandable to the visitors. We would like to start by asking Professor Mukhopadhyay, how did this idea germinate? What propelled you to set up such a gallery?
Well, actually, you see, I have been studying about this genesis of zero for almost last 2 decades now. It just so happens that we, the educated Indians, often take a pride in mentioning that zero was invented in India. But the unfortunate fact remains that this is perhaps precisely the amount of information that we, the common folks, have regarding the issue. So it used to haunt me for a long time that what exactly is meant by this invention? What exactly was the role of this zero? What was before it was not there? There are so many other ancient civilizations. What was their own methods of enumeration? Did they have something like zero? If it is the case, then why their zero is not considered usually as the progenitor of our modern zero? What is the speciality of this Indian zero? It was not invented in a laboratory, of course. So what exactly does this invention mean? In search of my answer, I have been going through the available books and literatures, research papers, written by so many eminent scholars from different corners of the globe in last 20 years. And here and there, I could make my own humble contribution. And finally, all these culminated in a form of a permanent exhibition gallery that I named the Zero Gallery at this Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur. Actually, in the year 2020, our college was celebrating its 60th year, the Diamond Jubilee. Our then principal, Srimat Shastragyanandaji Maharaj, one day asked me to initiate such a gallery that will be there forever to showcase this claim of Indian origin of zero. And it all began with that. The whole storyline here is essentially given in Bengali poem that is one of the very important feature of this gallery. The poems were written by Mrs. Madhumita Mukhopadhyay, thanks to her. And the fabrication and the design is done by Birla Industrial and Technological Museum of Kolkata. Later, when it was decided that we need to have a supplementary literature so that the visitors to the gallery can take it back after their visit, because it's almost impossible to retain the huge information that is there in the gallery just by listening to somebody or looking at it. It was decided by the college authority to publish books both in Bengali and English. And there, an important challenge of transliterating this Bengali storyline in poetry into corresponding English was eminent. This challenge, I must say, was excellently carried out by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Bijadi Chakraborty of our economics department. And finally, the Vivekananda Research Center of our college was kind enough to publish these two books. Professor Dr. Shanghomitra Bandyopadhyay, the director of Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, and Professor Ashish Chattopadhyay, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Academic, University of Calcutta, were kind enough to inaugurate the gallery.
Now, as we find the display boards that contain the evolution and the genesis, as you said, of zero, brings before us the civilizations and their contributions to this stream. Which are the civilizations that have been represented here? And in brief, if you could tell us how those civilizations viewed zero or didn't care for zero at all.
Well, you see, to the best of my ability, I have tried to touch upon all the ancient civilizations that had their own enumeration system. We start the gallery with the Egyptian civilization, then go to the Babylonians, followed by the Mayans, the Inca, the Greek civilization, Romans, Chinese, of course, Indian, and then the shifting of all this knowledge from India to Arab, and the time of pre-Renaissance, the way it reached Europe. The entire story you can find in the gallery. Of course, it's a huge story to tell. I just touch upon with one or two salient features of each of these civilizations. To begin with, I just would like to say that many of these ancient civilizations had their own version of nothingness, transferred partially to the idea of so-called zero or zero-like concepts. But apart from India, nowhere else it did bloom into its fullest potential as the number in its own right, a number on which arithmetical operations can be performed. For example, in ancient Egypt, the hieroglyphic system of enumeration was additive in nature, and such system don't need any zero. Symbols after symbols are to be invented for representing larger and larger numbers, and they are to be placed side by side, and their values are to be added to get hold of the number you want to represent by them. Even at a later period, we get the hieratic numerals that one can find in the famous Rhind papyrus. Still, it was additive. There was no zero in it. At a point of time, we do find of one particular symbol, NFR, Nafar, meaning beautiful, which refers to the base level of the pyramid. Initially pyramids were built on the common ground level, and the burial chambers were regularly destroyed by the recurrent inundation of Nile. At a point of time, the ancient Egyptian civil engineers understood that the base level should be lifted from the usual ground level to avoid this catastrophe, and that level, the new safe level where inundation of the burial chambers below the ground may be avoided was referred to as nefer. And from that level, the height of the pyramid and the depth of the burial chamber both were measured in cubit in opposite directions. Some scholars want to see a nascent, a tacit idea of a number line like concept here, with nefer playing the role of so-called zero. But of course, that's a very minority view, because in no mathematical discussions or documents we ever find nefer to play the role of a mathematical symbol at par with the other mathematical symbols used by them. Then if we come to Babylon, for a long period of time, Babylonians, they had a sexagesimal place value system. Just like our is decimal, we use 1 to 9, and we use a special symbol called zero that refers to the absence of this 1 to 9 in a certain place. Their system was sexagesimal, base 60. In every place, 1 to 59 can be put. And like our tens place and hundreds place and so on, their case it was units, 60s place, 60 squares place, and so on. For a long time, they couldn't invent the idea of a symbol which is necessary to represent the absence of the other symbols in a certain place. They used to leave a gap there simply. And as you can surely understand, that if a number has more than 1 zeros in the median position and you leave a gap for that, it's very difficult for the person who is looking at this representation at a later point of time that how many zeros are to be put there. So this system added to huge confusion. Around Seleucid period, 4th century BC, some Babylonian great mind invented a special symbol which somewhat looks like overlapping less than equal to signs. If one sign is overlapping the other one, somewhat like that, and that symbol was used as the placeholder zero. This symbol is considered as the oldest known written symbol of zero. But this zero, the Babylonians failed to appreciate its role as a number in its own right.
Now, allow me to interrupt here, Professor Mukhopadhyay, and let me ask you that we consider that zero was invented in India in the Vedic times. Often we refer to the seer scientist Aryabhat and often assert that he invented zero, which is probably not right. But my question is, though we are talking of different time phases, time periods, and there was not enough movability between the different nations, different countries as we have now, can we hold it true that the idea of zero invented in India actually traveled to other continents and influenced other civilizations?
Oh, it did. It did almost for certain. The question is with the time period of its invention. If you look at India, the most unfortunate void that we see here is the absence of written script. Ancient India, the Vedic period as you referred to, was the period of Shruti. Nothing was recorded in writing. So, it is very difficult to pin down authentically a time period of some specific invention. That is how we have to depend on some passive references. The most ancient reference to the concept of zero that we can find in India perhaps is in the Gopatha Brahmana. Brahmana, you know, is one of the ancient layers of the Vedic scriptures that comes after Samhitas. And in Gopatha Brahmana, it is referred to as Chidrang. It says Chidrang Khong iti yuktam. Kho happens to be the most common parlance used for zero in ancient India. The Ka, that means sky, the vast, limitless expanse, the Shunya, the Ananta, the infinitus. There's a dichotomy in Indian philosophy between this nothingness and everything, the zero of void and the all-pervading infinite. God himself was conceived as Honoronyan Mahoto Mohiyan, minuter than the minutest and simultaneously larger than the largest. Now, this idea, philosophical backbone of Indianness, actually allowed the then mathematicians to talk about the necessity of a symbol in mathematics that should represent nothingness. We see in the great work Ashtadhyayi of Panini, his structural analysis of grammar, the idea of tacit placeholder zero through the adarshanam lopaha, the concept of lopaha, vanishing of middle morpheme, experts say is very akin to the structural essence of placeholder zero. It's difficult to get into the details of such technical things in this medium. But after Panini, a concrete reference to Shunya is found in Pingala Chanda Sutra, a 3rd century BC text of prosody, where the prosodist Pingala in the 8th chapter is using the sutras Rupe Shunya, Di Shunye, clearly referring to the mathematical Shunya, the zero of Indian context, taking part into a beautiful combinatorial algorithm. And there are so many others. At a later period, in the Common Era, we find many references of Shunya as Vindu, the bold dot, essentially the original form of Indian zero in written scripts, which you can find, apart from other places, in Bakshali manuscript. It is replete with such zero. Of course, exact time frame of Bakshali manuscript is also hotly debated. 2017, we all know Bodleian library where the manuscript is now kept. They have run C14, the carbon dating on this, and the outcome on 4 such samples are of a varied time frame, starting from 3rd century to the 9th century.
Right. Now, the information that you have already given helps us to believe that there was communication between the several civilizations, and actually the idea of zero traveled to other civilizations.
Yes, I must just come to that point. Actually, this idea of zero from India, in one direction it traveled to China through the Buddhist monks around 8th century. In another direction it went to Arab, the court of Caliph Al-Mamun, even before that at the time of Al-Mansur, by one Kanaka, who has taken a volume of Brahma's Futo Siddhanto by Brahmagupta, and that was translated there. There's a great translational movement that was carried out in this court of Al-Mansur. It's called Bayat al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. And in this translational movement, this text was translated as Ziz al-Sindh Hind. Unfortunately, no original copy is extant, but one Latin translation of that by Adelard of Bath is extant, and its name is De Numero Indoram. The name refers to India, that it comes from India. And these translations were later, before Renaissance, it reached Europe, and Europe got the idea of this decimal system that revolutionized the entire mathematical calculation skill in Europe, to the extent that you can see the great historian in his book, The Wonder That Was India, by Basham. He is pointing out that had Europe been shackled by the unwieldy system of Roman numerals, then there's so many inventions of which Europe is so proud today would never have been possible, unless this timely intervention of history has happened through this Indian decimal system reaching Europe.
Listeners, we are confident that you are excited with such information flowing in such a smooth stream from Professor Parthu Sharathi Mukhopadhyay. And now we'll take a turn in this program, in this episode of Power of Listening, and move over to Professor Bijadi Chakraborty, who has done the translation work. But calling it translation is sort of minimizing the importance, reducing the amount of challenge that he has faced. We would like to call it communication, and we would like to ask him, how did you tackle this challenge?
When I was introduced to this project, I was surprised by the enormity because it was handling with 3 different millennia and 4 different continents and so many different civilizations at the same time. And the natural question that came to my mind was, what would these poems do? What kind of a role would they play in this particular literature? But originally, Mrs. Madhumita Mukhopadhyay already had conceived poems in native Bengali language, and I was supposed to make an English of that. But then I thought it is actually going to be very challenging to say deal with so many non-English names and technical words, mathematical say words that might not have been ever used in an English poem as such. So the main idea that I found out was to make a very well to hear say gist of the whole thing in a nutshell, presented in such a way with proper rhymes and meters that it will ring in the mind. It will work as a background music kind of thing, and with all these things that each particular chapter will begin. So I took up the challenge. I do not know how much the readers will say appreciate. There are certain philosophical things which were easy to do, and there are certain things, certain aspects like say from Middle East or say in Greece where things were difficult to deal with. I can cite an example from India. Is zero only the nothingness, forever so present with us? It's boundless too, that our rishis felt, the ananta, the infinitus, a singularity containing the entire creation before the elemental spark, the brightest light of our consciousness and the darkest of the dark. It has no beginning, this shunya, and in a sense, it doesn't have an end. Open only to our perception. Its disposition is cryptically explained in the Nashadiya Shukta of the Rig Veda, serving as a lighthouse on the shore of the ocean of wisdom to all naive navigators, now, after, or before. This particular theme was dealing with mainly, say, certain philosophical and historical accounts, but the real challenge was incorporating certain names which are not English, like this when we are dealing with the Islamic world. Let me quote some lines from the chapter on Islamic world and Europe. Graced was the court of Caliph al-Mansur by the venerable presence of Muhammad al-Fazari, a mathematical scholar of great eminence. He translated Brahmagupta's text, Brahmasphuto Siddhanta, brought to Arabia by an Indian astronomer named Kanaka. Ziz al-Sinhind, the Arabic translation, was done at Caliph's behest. Arab scholars came to know about zero and the decimal system with zest. As al-Khwarizmi, the savant of algorithm, penned al-Jabr wal-Mukabala, Indian arithmetic started winning over Arabs and right away was popular. So these are the kind of challenges and the kind of enriching experiences I had while say dealing with so many different kinds of concepts and names. But when the documentary was made by Professor Mukhopadhyay upon this, I was glad to notice that some of the lines were actually quoted or given as in the say as a leading line in the crawler. So that meant the effort was not in vain.
So you mean to say that the translation or as we would like to label it, communication process, has won the hearts of the visitors, and you find it quite successful. But at the same time, what happens to such academic exercises is, on second thought, you feel that this could have been done in a better way. This could have been replaced by that. Something like this. Did you have such thoughts afterwards?
It's difficult to say. There is always a scope for betterment, whichever way we look or to whatever project we actually analyze. But one needs to have some kind of a relief from intense communication with the data and information. So I think presenting something in the form of a verse just succeeded to do that. And that is very much memorable. At times, if the lines are well metered, well, say, rhymed, it will ring in the head long after the whole discussion is over. So there lies the importance, and of course there is a chance, there is a, say, probability to make it better. But again, we can only try to make it, say, as stretch ourselves to the limit of ourselves.
So, listeners, as we listen to the two experts, one specializing in content, another in communication, we were excited to learn how the idea of zero initiated in the country called India and how it spread to other civilizations, and then how this gallery, when being set up, considered all the phases of such evolution and came up with wonderful display boards that communicate to the visitor the essence of this germination, this evolution. Today, as we sign off from the program Power of Listening, we would like to thank the two academicians present here, Professor Partha Sharathi Mukhopadhyay and Professor Bijadi Chakraborty. And we feel like coming back again and again to this place to visit the gallery, to talk to them, to understand more about zero and how the idea spread. But before we conclude this episode, we would like to listen to a few lines being recited by Professor Bijaditya Chakraborty. And those few lines probably hold the essence of this whole exhibition, this Zero Gallery.
Zero has always been with us from the ancient times, although its somber discourse differed across paradigms. All recorded avatars of Zero, dissimilar in rank and role, are gathered here in this hall to help you have a stroll through the winding roads of history to the bend at the recent past, when Indian Zero gets accepted by all as a mathematical first.
Well, listeners, nothing need to be spoken after that. We conclude this episode saying goodbye.
The Zero Gallery, Kolkata. You heard this episode of our series on traditional Indian knowledge systems. Power of Listening. The experts on the show were Professor P. Mukhopadhyay and Bijaditya Chakraborty. In conversation with them was Dr. Manas Pratim Das. This episode was produced by Dr. Manas Pratim Das and Randhir Thakur. This episode is also available on our official YouTube channel, Akashvani AIR. We shall be back next week, same time, same frequencies. This is Manoj Mainkar, signing off from Delhi. Bye for now.